The morning my marriage ended, I was standing in the driveway holding a cardboard box and a dying succulent. Not a dramatic box, not the kind you see in movies where someone throws clothes out a window. Just a medium-sized Amazon box with the flaps folded in, holding a few coffee mugs, a picture frame, and the small ceramic owl I'd kept on my desk since college. The succulent was in a cracked plastic pot. I'd forgotten to water it for 3 weeks. Half of it had gone gray. My husband, my ex-husband, I was already supposed to be calling him that, was standing in the doorway watching me load the car. He wasn't angry. That almost made it worse. He looked the way someone looks when they're returning a library book, mildly inconvenienced. Mostly just ready to be done with it. "You forgot the blender," he said. "Keep it," I said. "It was yours." "I know." I put the box in the trunk and drove away without looking back. I was 31 years old. I had been married for 4 years and we had been trying, or I had been trying, and he had been tolerating the trying, for the last 2 of them. And now I was driving to a rental I found on Craigslist in a neighborhood I'd never been to, with a dying succulent and no blender, and I had exactly one thought in my head. I am starting over. I didn't know yet what that meant. I don't think I even believed it. It was just something to hold on to while I merged onto the freeway and tried not to cry in traffic. The house was a small craftsman on a street called Birchwood Lane, in a part of Asheville, North Carolina, that nobody my age would have chosen on purpose. The neighbors were mostly retired. The street was quiet in the way that only streets without children are quiet. A complete, almost thick kind of silence, especially in the evenings. I moved in on a Saturday in October. The landlord had left a key under the mat and a note on the kitchen counter that said the garbage went out on Tuesdays. That was the extent of my welcome. I made 3 trips from the car to the front door. On the second trip, carrying a duffel bag and a lamp, I noticed the man next door. He was sitting on his porch steps, not doing anything in particular, just sitting. He had a yellow Labrador lying across his feet, and he was drinking coffee from a plain white mug, and he was watching me the way people watch weather, present but unhurried. He was somewhere in his late 30s, maybe 40, dark hair going a little gray at the temples, a gray flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up despite the cold. He didn't wave. He didn't introduce himself. He just watched, and when I glanced over, he gave a small, single nod, the kind that means I see you without making a big deal of it. I nodded back and went inside. His name, I would later learn, was Cal. That was all anyone on the street seemed to call him. Just Cal. He'd moved in about a year before I did, and in that time, according to the woman across the street who introduced herself as Margaret and immediately invited me to her book club, he had been polite to everyone and personal with no one. "He fixes things," Margaret told me, the second time we spoke. "Mrs. Hendricks had a broken gate and he just appeared one afternoon and fixed it. Didn't ask. Didn't tell her he was going to. Just fixed it." "That's kind," I said. "It's something," she said in a tone I couldn't quite read. My ex-husband's name was Derek. We had met at 26, gotten engaged at 28, married at 27. No, wait, I always get this wrong. My therapist pointed it out once. I always list the events out of order when I talk about Derek, like my brain is still trying to rearrange them into a shape that makes sense. We met at 26. We married at 28. By 29, I was visiting a fertility clinic alone because Derek had decided that the testing was, and I am quoting here, "a lot to deal with right now." The test came back with an answer that was complicated and frustrating, and ultimately, the doctor said, manageable. I had a condition. It was common. It was treatable. There were options. Derek, when I told him, was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I just think we should consider whether we're putting too much pressure on this one thing." I said, "The one thing is whether we can have children." He said, "I know. I think we should think about what we actually want." What he actually wanted, I found out 14 months later, was to not be married to someone with a complicated fertility situation. He'd been thinking about it for a while. He was sorry. He hoped I understood. I didn't understand, but I signed the papers, because what else do you do? We had a prenuptial agreement. Derek had insisted on it. which I thought was strange at the time, but had agreed to because I was 27 and in love and not paying close enough attention. The prenup meant I left with very little. The settlement was so small it was almost a joke. Barely enough to cover 3 months of rent on the Craftsman on Birchwood Lane. My mother, when I told her the number, was very quiet. Then she said, "Sweetheart, did you have a lawyer look at that prenup?" "Not really," I said. She was quiet again. "It's okay," I said. "I'm starting over." The first time Cal actually spoke to me, more than a nod, was about 3 weeks after I moved in. I was in the driveway attempting to hang a string of lights along my front porch railing. The ladder I'd borrowed from my landlord was slightly too short and slightly unstable, and I was reaching further than I should have been, and the whole thing was going poorly. "You're going to fall," said a voice from the sidewalk. I looked down. Cal was standing there with the yellow lab on a leash, both of them watching me with similar expressions of mild concern. "I'm fine," I said. "You're at a 40-degree angle." "I'm almost done. The left bracket is facing the wrong way. Even if you finish, it won't hold." I looked at the bracket. He was right. I climbed down. We stood there for a moment, and he handed the leash to no one in particular. The dog sat immediately like she'd been asked, and came over and looked at the bracket. Then, without asking, he took the lights from me, repositioned the bracket with a quarter turn, and climbed the ladder himself. It took him 4 minutes. The lights went up perfectly. "Thank you," I said. "The ladder needs a new foot," he said, climbing down. "The rubber's worn. You want me to grab one from the hardware store? I'm going Wednesday." I blinked. "You don't have to do that." "I go anyway," he said. He picked up the leash. The dog stood immediately. "The lab's name is Hazel," he said, as if I'd asked. "I'm Sarah," I said. "I know," he said. "Margaret told me." He walked back across the yard. I stood there holding the end of the now correctly installed lights and watched him go and thought that was either very kind or very strange, and I genuinely wasn't sure which. October turned into November. I started a job at a small nonprofit 2 miles away, grant writing, mostly, which I'd done before and was decent at. The pay wasn't impressive, but it was steady and it was mine, completely mine, with no one else's opinion attached to it. I did not date. I did not want to date. I went to Margaret's book club twice, which was mostly wine and talking about our feelings about the book rather than the book itself, and I found that I didn't mind it. I started watering the succulent. Remarkably, it began to recover. 2 new arms grew from the gray part. 2 new arms grew from the gray part. I took this personally as a sign. Cal would appear sometimes, not intrusively, just present. He'd be working on something in his own yard and would look up and wave when I came home. Once I had a package that had been delivered to his porch by mistake, and when I knocked to get it, he answered the door in pink-covered jeans and said thank you, and that was the whole interaction. I asked Margaret what he did for work. "I genuinely have no idea," she said. "He takes phone calls sometimes. I've heard him on the porch. He sounds very serious on the phone, like someone who's deciding things." "Maybe he's a contractor," I said. "Maybe," she said in that same tone. It was the first week of December when I found the apple tree. In the backyard of the Craftsman, there was a small apple tree, probably 15 years old. The landlord had mentioned it once, that had done well enough until a storm the week before had torn one of its main branches almost entirely off. It was hanging at a broken angle, still barely attached, a third of the tree just suspended, damaged, not yet dead. I stood in the backyard looking at it for a while. I knew I should call the landlord. I also knew the landlord would probably just cut the whole thing down. I was still standing there when I heard the gate open. Cal came through it, Hazel at his heels, and stopped when he saw the tree. "Storm got it," he said. "Yeah." He walked over and examined the break, running his hand along the split bark. He crouched down and looked at the base. "It's not all the way through," he said. "The tissue's intact underneath. If you brace it and wrap it right, it might actually fuse. Can you do that?" He looked up at me. "You want me to try, would you?" He was quiet for a moment, studying the tree. "Come back tomorrow. Bring some cloth strips if you have them. Old t-shirt works, and don't call the landlord yet. I came back the next day. He was already there. He'd brought his own materials. A length of flexible tubing, some grafting tape, a folding knife. We worked on the tree for about 2 hours, him doing most of the technical work, me handing him things and holding branches when he asked. At one point he said, without looking up from the branch, "How long were you married?" I paused. 4 years. You? He was quiet for long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "I wasn't. I was with someone for a long time. It didn't work out the way I thought. I didn't push. He didn't offer more." We finished with the tree, and he packed up his tools and said the branch would take about 6 weeks to show whether it was going to heal or not. Then he left. I stood and looked at the tree for a while. It looked wounded, but held together. Precarious, but not hopeless. I thought about that for the rest of the night. I didn't mean to tell Cal about the fertility stuff. I hadn't told most people, only my mother, my therapist, one friend in Portland who sent a long voice message in response that I had to listen to in 3 sittings because it kept making me cry. It happened on a Thursday evening in December. We had gotten into the habit, somehow, of sitting on my porch steps sometimes, when the weather permitted, with coffee and Hazel between us, not talking very much. He would ask occasional questions and then listen to the answers without filling the silence after them, which was rarer than it sounds. That night I told him about Derek. Not the whole story, just the shape of it. The years. The testing. The prenup. I hadn't read carefully enough. The morning with the box and the succulent and the library book expression on my ex-husband's face. Cal was quiet all the way through. Then he said, "The fertility issues, are they resolved?" I looked at him. The doctor said there are options, probably. They were careful with the word probably. But you haven't pursued them. I moved to a new city 6 weeks ago. Right. He drank his coffee. Hazel was asleep across my feet. I didn't stop wanting it, I said, which I hadn't meant to say out loud. A family, I mean. Derek made me feel like wanting it was something I was doing to him, but I didn't stop wanting it. Cal looked at the street for a long moment. Then he said, "You shouldn't have to stop." It was such a simple thing to say, but it settled in my chest like something I'd been waiting to hear for 2 years. In January, my ex-husband reappeared. I don't know how he knew where I'd moved. I hadn't told him. He called first, which I didn't answer. Then he texted, which said only, "I'm going to be in Asheville next week. We should talk." I stared at that text for a long time. We had nothing left to talk about. The papers were signed, the settlement was closed. I had moved to a city he had never been to, and I was learning to water a succulent and fix ladders and brace broken trees, and I did not want him here. I texted back, "There's nothing to discuss, Derek." He responded, "I think there is." He showed up on a Tuesday. I was pulling into the driveway when I saw him, sitting in a rental car outside my house, checking his phone. He was wearing the kind of outfit that took effort to make look effortless. He looked like a man who thought he was doing me a favor. "You look good," he said when I got out. "Derek, I just want to talk. 10 minutes. He walked me through it with the calm precision he used for everything. He had been thinking about our situation. He felt the terms of the settlement were perhaps too hasty. He'd like to revisit some things. Specifically, he'd like to revisit the money. Not to give more, I understood quickly, but because he'd found a discrepancy in his own accounting and needed a signature from me on a revised document. I stood very still. "You want me," I said slowly, "to sign something that reduces what I already received." "It would adjust." "No," I said. He blinked. He wasn't used to "no" delivered cleanly, without explanation. "Sarah," I said, "no. Please get in your car." I had been trying to convey something with my voice that I wasn't sure I was managing. I was shaking slightly, though I didn't want to be. I was aware that I had no idea what was legal, what my rights were, whether the prenup he'd had me sign could even be touched at this point. I was also aware, suddenly, that Cal's truck was in his driveway and the front door of his house was open. Derek spent another 4 minutes trying. He used a tone I remembered, patient, faintly disappointed, the tone of someone explaining something to a person who isn't quite keeping up. I said no twice more. Finally, he got back in the car. He drove away. I stood in my driveway until his taillights disappeared. Then I sat down on the front porch steps and just breathed for a minute. The sound of Cal's front door opening was soft. He didn't come over. He just sat down on his own steps, across the small divide of our 2 yards, with his coffee mug. Hazel settled beside him. We didn't speak. He just stayed there. I don't know why that helped. It just did. Did he threaten you? Cal asked the next morning. He had appeared at my door with 2 cups of coffee from the place 2 streets over and handed me one before I'd said anything. Not exactly, I said. He just wanted a signature. On what? I told him. He listened without interrupting. You have the original prenup, he said, somewhere. In a folder. Get it, he said. Don't sign anything Derek sends you. I know someone who does family law. I'll have her look at it. I looked at him. Cal, you don't need to. She owes me a favor, he said simply. It's not a big ask. I got the folder. The lawyer, a woman named Diane, who called me 3 days later with the ease of someone who did this constantly, reviewed the prenup and was quiet on the phone for a moment and then said, there are 2 clauses in here that are, frankly, unenforceable. The way this was written, you may actually be entitled to considerably more than you received. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I'm sorry, what? The asset declaration is incomplete on his side. That's not a minor issue. Who drafted this? Derek hired the lawyer. Another pause. Of course he did, she said in a tone that told me everything I needed to know about what she thought of that. I found out I was pregnant in February. I know what you're thinking. I know how this sounds. But listen, Cal and I had been spending time together since November. Not cautiously, not officially, just in the way that 2 people living next door to each other who have grown to trust each other sometimes become more than neighbors without announcing it. It happened slowly and then, like the recovery of a damaged tree, all at once. The pregnancy test sat on my bathroom counter while I stood in the hallway, not quite able to look at it. 2 years of trying with Derek and nothing. 6 weeks of being, for the first time in my life, truly, genuinely happy. And this. I picked it up. Positive. I slid down the bathroom wall and sat on the tile and pressed the heel of my hand to my mouth and just felt everything at once. Terror. Disbelief. Something underneath both of those that I was not quite brave enough yet to call joy. I called the doctor before I called Cal. Given your history, the doctor said, I'd like to see you soon and confirm with imaging. There's something I want to check. She was carefully neutral on the phone, the way medical professionals are when they know more than they're saying. What are you checking for? I asked. Let's just come in and take a look, she said. I went in the next morning. Cal drove me. He sat in the waiting room with his elbows on his knees and his hands folded, looking like a man who had decided to be calm and was managing it exactly. The ultrasound technician was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a careful tone that precedes information that will change a conversation, So, I'm seeing 2. I turned my head to look at the screen. 2. I heard Cal breathe out slowly from the chair beside the table, where he had been allowed to sit. His hand found mine. Twins? The technician confirmed. Both look good, early but good. I didn't cry in the appointment. I waited until we were in the parking lot, sitting in Cal's truck, and then I cried for about 10 minutes straight while he held my hand and didn't say anything at all, which was exactly right. Derek found out, the way Derek always found out, things he wasn't supposed to know. Through mutual connections, through people who thought they were being kind by keeping him informed. He called in March. I heard you're pregnant, he said. He sounded like he was assembling a legal argument while he spoke, organizing his words into the right shape. That's not your business, I said. We were married 2 years ago. We're not married now. You ended it. You signed papers. You came to my house in January and tried to get money back. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. You have no claim here, Derek. None. I'm just saying Diane is still looking at that prenup, I said. I'd recommend you talk to your lawyer before you call me again. There was a long silence. Who is Diane? He said, and for the first time his voice had an unfamiliar quality in it, something that was almost off balance. Goodbye, Derek, I said, and I hung up. In April, Diane called with news. The prenup discrepancy, the incomplete asset declaration on Derek's side, had opened a door. He had, it turned out, failed to disclose 2 investment accounts in the original filing. This was not a small oversight. It had been, Diane said carefully, quite intentional. The number she quoted me was not the number I had received in the settlement. The number she quoted me was very different. I sat with the phone against my cheek for a while after she finished talking. He's going to want to settle quietly, she said, before this goes anywhere official. Let him sweat for a week, I said. Diane laughed, the first time I'd heard her laugh. I think I'm going to enjoy working with you, she said. I was 7 months along, enormous, uncomfortable, deeply grateful, when Derek came to Birchwood Lane for the second and final time. He pulled up in a different rental car, a nicer one. He got out looking like he prepared for this visit. He was wearing a suit. I was sitting on the porch steps. Cal was in the yard doing something with the small raised garden beds he'd built in March, ostensibly for me, though I'd had little to do with the actual building. Hazel was sleeping near the steps. The apple tree in the backyard had fused. New growth had come in along the repaired branch, small and green and undeniable. Derek stopped at the edge of the walkway. He looked at Cal. Cal looked at him. Sarah, Derek said, I'd like to speak with you alone. No, I said. He looked at Cal again. Cal had gone back to the garden bed and was doing something methodical with the soil, utterly unbothered. This is none of your business, I said. Diane told you what the options are. You can settle on the terms she outlined, or you can go to court. Those are your 2 choices. Those numbers are insane. They're the numbers that reflect what you actually had when we were married, I said. The accounts you forgot to mention. Derek's jaw tightened. He had a look on his face I hadn't seen before, something between embarrassed and cornered. The polished patience was gone. You couldn't even give me a child, he said. His voice had dropped. It was just for me, he thought. Something to land somewhere that would hurt. Cal set down the trowel and turned around. He didn't walk over. He just stood there. But something in the quality of his stillness was different now, the way a room changes when someone large stands up. I'd be careful, Cal said mildly, about what comes next. Derek looked at him. Something passed across his face. Cal's actual occupation, which I had learned about not from Cal but from Diane, who had said, "You know who your neighbor is, right?" with an odd expression, was something I hadn't expected. He had sold a software company 8 years ago. He had another one now, smaller, that he ran quietly from his house on Birchwood Lane. He had more money than Derek had tried to take from me, and then more money than that. And none of it was visible in his flannel shirts, or his truck, or his one coffee mug. He had been in Asheville because he'd wanted a place where none of that was the first thing someone saw when they looked at him. Derek did not know any of this, but something in the way Cal was standing seemed to communicate that he was not a man to be tested. Derek took his settlement. He signed the revised agreement 2 weeks later. He did not come back to Birchwood Lane. The girls were born on a Tuesday in June, just before midnight. My mother was in the waiting room. She had driven from Atlanta and arrived 2 days early, which was very like her, and had spent those 2 days cooking things and leaving them in my refrigerator with handwritten labels. She had also, in the way that mothers sometimes know things before they're told them, taken to Cal immediately and without fanfare, as if he'd been there all along. The girls were small but certain. The doctors used words like strong and clear-eyed and good volume, which in a delivery room means they were making themselves known. I held them both and thought about the morning in October with the cardboard box and the dying succulent, and the man watching me from the porch steps with his coffee and his dog and his complete absence of hurry. The succulent was on the windowsill in the living room now. It had 3 new arms. The gray part had filled in. It was, against all odds, thriving. Cal came in when they let him. He stood at the edge of the room for a moment, looking at me holding both of them, and something moved across his face that he didn't try to manage or contain. "Come here," I said. He came. He sat on the edge of the bed, and I shifted, and he took one of them, the smaller one, the one we would come to call the loud one, which would strike everyone who met her as hilarious, and held her with the careful certainty of someone who had prepared for important things. "Hi," he said to her, very quietly, like a beginning. My mother appeared in the doorway, took one look, pressed her hand to her mouth, and retreated to give us the moment. Outside the window, the sky was that particular blue of early summer, just past dark, still holding the last trace of the day, the kind of sky that doesn't ask you to explain yourself, just holds you in it. I thought about the tree, about the branch that had seemed irreparably broken, hanging at an angle that looked like ending, and how the healing had happened slowly, underneath where you couldn't see it, until one morning in April you looked and the green was just there, quiet and definite and new. Some things that look like they're ending are only changing shape. I had moved to Birchwood Lane with a cardboard box and a dying plant and no idea what starting over actually looked like. Now I knew. It looked like this. There is something I have come to believe, not because anyone told me to, but because I lived it. The way you treat people in their most diminished moments is a debt that collects interest. Not from the universe, not from any force you have to name, just from the plain mechanical logic of cause and effect. Derek signed a prenuptial agreement that hid 2 investment accounts. He told me my body was a problem he was tired of managing. He showed up at my door a year later expecting me to sign something that would take even more from me. Every one of those choices was a stone he was laying down on a path that led, inevitably, somewhere he didn't expect to end up. I am not telling this story because Derek got what he deserved, though he did. I'm telling it because of what I had to become in order to walk through it. When I moved to Birchwood Lane, I had nothing that looked like strength. I had a dying plant and a box of coffee mugs and a prenuptial agreement I hadn't read carefully enough because I was 27 and believed that love made caution unnecessary. That is not a moral failure. That is just being young and trusting the wrong person. But what I did after, that part I owned completely. I said no to Derek when my voice was shaking. I found Diane not because someone handed her to me, but because I was willing to ask Cal for help. And asking for help when you're not sure you deserve it is its own kind of courage. I went to every appointment. I made every hard phone call. I sat with uncertainty for months and did not collapse into it. That is what I mean when I think about what this story actually taught me. Not that good things happen to people who wait. They don't, not automatically. Good things happen to people who keep making small, honest decisions even when they're frightened. Who water the plant even when half of it has gone gray? Who brace the broken branch instead of cutting the tree down? Cal could not have found me if I had not been the kind of person who moves somewhere new and tries to hang lights on a porch she isn't sure yet is home. The lawyer could not help me if I had signed what Derek put in front of me. My daughters exist because I refused to stop wanting what I wanted, even when someone I trusted made me feel that wanting it was a burden to him. That is the thing about integrity. Not the performed kind, not the kind you announce, but the quiet kind. The kind that shows up in small decisions no one is watching. It accumulates. It builds something underneath you that holds when the ground shifts. Derek walked away from our marriage believing that quiet people are easy to take from. He was wrong about that, and Birchwood Lane was where he found out. I think about the apple tree sometimes. The branch that healed in the dark, underneath the wrapping, where no growth was visible. That is what those months were for me. Healing that didn't announce itself, that just kept going because stopping wasn't really an option. My girls are here now. The tree is full. The succulent has 5 arms. I am starting over was what I thought that October morning. What I know now is that I wasn't starting over at all. I was starting for the first time correctly.